The deaf Alpha King married an obese girl because of a bet, a twisted lottery orchestrated by the most trusted man in his court, a gamble designed to prove that even a king could be humiliated if you chose the right pawn. The girl's name was pulled from a ceremonial urn in front of 300 nobles who erupted in laughter the moment they saw her. A kitchen servant, soft-bodied and silent, invisible to everyone who mattered. The perfect victim for a cruel joke. But no one in that glittering hall knew the truth. They didn't know she was the last living heir of a forbidden bloodline, a family of healers massacred for their gifts. They didn't know her magic could break curses that conventional medicine couldn't touch. They didn't know she had come to the palace hunting the man who had ordered her family's execution. A man who now stood beside the throne, smiling in false sympathy, wearing her father's ring as proof of a crime no one else remembered. And they certainly didn't know that the king's deafness was not an accident of war, but a deliberate curse planted by the same man who had destroyed her world. When her hand touched the king's during the binding ceremony, his wolf roared to life for the first time in 3 years. It recognized her before his conscious mind could catch up. The mate bond sparked between two people who had every reason to stay strangers. A broken king who believed he was unworthy of love, and a vengeful girl who had sworn never to trust anyone again. But fate does not ask permission, and when the moment came, when she stood before the entire court and pulled something dark and impossible from the king's ear, everything changed. This is the story of how it happened. The grand hall of the Northern Crescent Palace smelled of pine smoke and crushed roses. Mira pressed herself against the cold stone wall, half hidden behind a column draped in autumn garlands. Around her, the other servants whispered and shifted, their eyes bright with the kind of cruel anticipation that came from watching someone else's humiliation. She should not be here. Kitchen staff were meant to stay below during court ceremonies, but the head cook had sent word that every soul in the palace was required to attend. No exceptions. Mira had braided her hair tightly, worn her plainest dress, and positioned herself where the shadows were deepest. Invisible, as always. At the front of the hall, torches blazed in iron sconces, casting flickering light across 300 nobles dressed in silk and velvet. They filled the benches in a sea of jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, crimson, and their laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling like breaking glass. On the dais, the king sat alone. Mira had seen him before, of course. Everyone in the palace had. King Theron Ashenblade was impossible to miss, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair and a face carved from angles and discipline. But she had never been this close, never watched him for more than a stolen glance in a corridor. He sat utterly still on his throne, his hands resting on the carved armrests. His pale blue eyes scanned the crowd with the slow, deliberate focus of a man who could not afford to miss anything. A scar ran from his temple to his cheekbone. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to breathe easily. Lord Caspian stood beside the throne, golden-haired and resplendent in dark velvet. He raised his hands, and the hall fell silent. "My lords and ladies," Caspian said, his voice smooth as honey, "we gathered tonight to honor tradition and celebrate the strength of our beloved king." Mira's stomach turned. She knew that voice. She had heard it 1,000 times in her nightmares. Calm and persuasive, the kind that made people trust him even as he lied to their faces. Caspian gestured to a ceremonial urn placed on a table near the throne. It was ornate, etched with silver runes, and filled with folded slips of parchment. "The harvest lottery," Caspian continued, "is an ancient rite, a symbol of unity between crown and kingdom. Tonight, fate will choose a bride for our king, a woman selected by chance, bound by sacred vow, and honored for 1 year as queen consort." The nobles erupted in applause. Mira's fingers curled into fists. This was no ancient rite. This was a spectacle. A cruel joke designed to humiliate a king who could not hear the laughter aimed at him. Her gaze flicked to Caspian's hands. He wore 5 rings, 1 on each finger. The 4th finger of his right hand bore a signet ring silver, etched with a curling vine. Her father's ring. The ring Caspian had stolen from a dead man's hand 17 years ago. After ordering the execution of every member of House Sylvain, Mira's wolf stirred deep in her chest, a sensation she had not felt in years. It pressed against her ribs, restless and angry. "Not yet," she told it silently. "Not yet." Caspian reached into the urn and drew the first slip of parchment. He unfolded it with theatrical care. Lady Seraphine of House Greymont. A young noblewoman stood, blushing and breathless, and curtsied. The crowd clapped politely. Caspian smiled and placed the parchment aside. He drew again. Lady Isolde of House Marrow. More applause. Another name. Another polite rejection. The pattern continued. Each name was announced, each woman acknowledged, and each slip discarded. The nobles began to murmur, confused. This was not how the lottery was supposed to work. Mira's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. Caspian reached into the urn one final time. His smile widened. "Mira," he said, his voice carrying across the hall like a blade. "Daughter of the palace cook." The hall went silent. Then the laughter began. It started as a ripple, a few stifled chuckles from the younger nobles, and built into a wave of mocking delight. Servants turned to stare. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. Someone near the front actually stood to get a better look. Mira could not move. Her legs had turned to stone. A hand closed around her wrist. One of the king's guards, his face expressionless, pulled her forward. She stumbled, her worn shoes catching on the hem of her dress. The walk to the dais felt endless. Every eye in the hall followed her. She heard the whispers, "Fat, clumsy kitchen girl," "unworthy," and felt the weight of them settle on her shoulders like chains. She climbed the steps to the dais. Her hands were shaking. Caspian stood beside the throne, his pale green eyes glittering with triumph. "Your bride, your majesty," he said, gesturing to Mira with a flourish. The king did not react. He sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. Of course he did not react. He could not hear the laughter, could not hear the mockery or the jeers or the whispered insults. Mira's chest ached. Caspian produced a length of ceremonial ribbon, silver silk embroidered with runes. He gestured for Mira to extend her hand. She did. Her fingers trembled. Theron's gaze shifted. He looked at her for the first time. His eyes were the color of winter frost, pale, piercing, and impossibly sharp. They swept over her face, her braid, her worn dress. There was no pity in them, no disgust, just curiosity. He extended his hand. The moment their palms touched, the world tilted. Heat shot through Mira's arm, sharp and electric. Her wolf surged upward, no longer silent, no longer suppressed. It filled her chest with a single, impossible word: mate, no. She tried to pull away, but Caspian was already binding their wrists together with the silver ribbon, his movements quick and practiced. The runes glowed faintly as the binding took hold. Theron's jaw tightened. His fingers closed around hers, strong, warm, trembling slightly. His wolf felt it too. Mira could see it in the way his shoulders went rigid, the way his breathing changed, the way his gaze locked onto hers and refused to let go. Caspian stepped back, spreading his arms wide. "The rite is complete," he announced. "Long live the king and his bride." The court applauded thin, mocking applause that echoed through the hall like breaking glass. Mira stood frozen, her hand still bound to the king's, her wolf howling inside her chest. This was not supposed to happen. She was supposed to stay invisible. She was supposed to stay hidden until she could destroy the man who had stolen everything from her. But Caspian had changed the game. He had dragged her into the light, and now the mate bond, real, undeniable, impossible, was pulling her toward a man she could not afford to love. The applause faded. The nobles began to disperse, their laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Theron released her hand. The loss of his warmth was immediate and devastating. He stood, towering over her, and gestured for a servant to remove the ribbon. His face was unreadable. Mira stepped back, her heart hammering. Across the dais, Caspian watched them both, his smile small and satisfied. The king turned and walked toward the private entrance behind the throne. He did not look back. But as Mira descended the steps, her legs shaking and her wolf still screaming, she felt the weight of his gaze settle on her one last time. When she turned, his pale eyes met hers across the emptying hall. He was not looking at her with pity. He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he could not solve, like she was something he needed to understand. The escort through the palace corridors felt like a walk to execution. 2 servants flanked Mira, silent and stiff, their footsteps echoing off stone walls lit by guttering torches. They did not look at her. No one had looked at her since the ceremony ended, not with anything resembling kindness. The king's chambers were in the eastern tower. Mira had scrubbed floors in the swing before, but she had never climbed these particular stairs. They spiraled upward, narrow and cold. And by the time they reached the heavy oak door, her calves burned and her breathing had gone shallow. One of the servants knocked. There was no response, but the door swung open on its own. Mira stepped inside. The servants retreated immediately, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft final click. The chamber was sparse, almost austere. A single room with stone walls, a high ceiling, and narrow windows that overlooked the palace courtyard. A writing desk dominated one corner, its surface buried beneath stacks of parchment, rolled maps, and inkwells. A bed stood against the far wall, large, neatly made, untouched. The only warmth came from a fire burning low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the floor. The king stood by the window, his back to her. He did not turn, did not acknowledge her presence at all. Mira's wolf pressed against her ribs, restless and agitated. It wanted to go to him, wanted to close the distance between them and number where. She forced herself to stand still, her hands folded in front of her. Waiting. The silence stretched. Outside, she could hear the faint sound of voices drifting up from the courtyard, nobles departing, guards changing shifts, the ordinary sounds of a palace settling into night. Finally, Theron moved. He crossed to the writing desk, picked up a piece of parchment, and wrote something in quick, decisive strokes. Then he turned and held it out to her. Mira stepped forward and took it. His fingers did not touch hers this time, but she felt the loss of that contact like a physical ache. She looked down at the note. "You will have your own chambers. I will arrange it in the morning. This marriage is political theater. You owe me nothing." Mira read the words twice. Her throat tightened. He was offering her an escape. A way out of the humiliation, the mockery, the cruelty of being tied to a king. The court pitied and despised. Most women would have wept with relief. But Mira's wolf snarled low in her chest, furious at the rejection it could not understand. She looked up. Theron was watching her, his pale blue eyes sharp and assessing, waiting for her response. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word so he could read her lips. "I will stay." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his gaze. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. He reached for another piece of parchment. Why? Mira's mind raced. She could not tell him the truth that she had spent 5 years hunting the man who destroyed her family, that staying close to the king meant staying close to Caspian, that this marriage was the best cover she would ever have. So she lied. "I have nowhere else to go." It was not entirely false. The girl she had been, Mira Sylvain, daughter of a noble house, had died 17 years ago. The girl who stood here now had no family, no home, no place in the world except the one she had carved out in the palace kitchens. Theron studied her for a long moment. His jaw was tight, and she noticed the way his hand curled slightly at his side, as if he were fighting the urge to reach for her. He wrote again. "You could leave the palace, start over somewhere else. I would provide gold." Mira's chest ached. He was trying to protect her, trying to give her freedom. He had no idea she did not want it. "I want to stay," she said, her voice steady. Theron's gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there as he absorbed her words. Then he nodded once, sharp and final, and turned back to the desk. He wrote a single word. "Why?" Mira hesitated. Her wolf whined, desperate for her to tell him the truth, that the bond was real, that it terrified her, that she felt it pulling her toward him like a tide she could not resist. But she could not say that. Not yet. Not when she had so much to hide, so she stayed silent. Theron waited. When she did not answer, he set the quill down and turned to face her fully. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something raw and aching and lonely. He did not press, did not demand an answer. He simply gestured toward the door, releasing her. Mira took a step back, then another. Her fingers tightened on the parchment she still held. She should leave. She should go before her wolf betrayed her, before the pull of the mate bond became too strong to ignore. But before she reached the door, she glanced out the window. The courtyard below was lit by torches, and she could see figures moving in the amber light. Nobles lingering in clusters, servants clearing the hall, guards patrolling the walls. And there, near the entrance to the council chambers, stood Lord Caspian. He was speaking with two other men, lords she did not recognize. His golden hair gleamed in the firelight, and his hands moved as he spoke, gesturing with easy confidence. On his right hand, the fourth finger, a silver ring caught the light. Her father's ring. Mira's wolf went still. Her vision narrowed. She had seen that ring 1,000 times in her nightmares, had memorized every curve of the vine etched into the silver, every scratch and imperfection. It was the signet ring of House Sylvain, passed down through generations, worn by her father until the day Caspian's men dragged him into the courtyard and she forced herself to breathe. Caspian laughed at something one of the lords said. He clapped the man on the shoulder, all charm and warmth, and the group began to disperse. Mira turned away from the window. Her hands were shaking. Theron was watching her. His gaze flicked from her face to the window, as if trying to understand what she had seen. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the offer, but I will stay." Theron's jaw tightened. He nodded once, then gestured toward the door again. Mira left. The hallway outside was empty and cold. She walked quickly, her footsteps echoing, her mind already racing through the logistics. Caspian was careless with the ring. He wore it openly, arrogantly, confident that no one would recognize it. But Mira recognized it. And now that she was the king's wife, however meaningless the title, she had access to places she had never been allowed before. Council meetings, private dinners, the restricted archives. She could get close to Caspian, close enough to find proof of what he had done, close enough to destroy him. Her wolf stirred, uneasy. It did not care about revenge. It only cared about the man she had just left standing alone in his chambers, isolated and silent and aching. "Mate," it whispered. "Go back." Mira ignored it. She descended the spiral stairs, her fingers curled into fists, her mind already mapping Caspian's routines, his patterns, his vulnerabilities. She would use this marriage. She would earn the king's trust, stay close to his court, and take back everything Caspian had stolen. It did not matter that her wolf recognized Theron as her mate. It did not matter that his touch had set her skin on fire, or that his gaze had made her feel seen for the first time in years. She had a mission. And she would not let anything, not even a bond she had never asked for, stand in her way. Behind her, in the king's chambers, Theron stood by the window and watched her disappear into the night. His wolf surged against his control, nearly forcing the shift, and he gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white. He did not understand what had just happened, did not understand why his wolf had roared to life the moment her hand touched his, or why the silence of his world felt heavier now that she was gone. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was hiding something. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm Mira had never known before, half invisibility, half scrutiny. She moved through the palace like a ghost with two shadows, tracking Caspian's movements while her wolf pulled her relentlessly toward the king. She spent her mornings in the kitchens. The other servants had stopped whispering when she entered, but their silence was worse than mockery. They watched her with careful, nervous eyes, as if she might shatter or transform into something they could not predict. Mira kept her head down and her hands busy, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, pretending she was still one of them. But she was not. Not anymore. In the afternoons, she tracked Caspian. She learned his patterns quickly. He met with Lord Brennan every third day in the East Gallery, disappeared into the restricted archives on Tuesdays and Fridays, and took his evening meal alone in his private chambers. He moved through the palace with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable, his rings glinting in the torchlight, his smile warm and false. Mira memorized every detail. Every route, every pause, every weakness. And in the evenings, when she could no longer ignore the pull in her chest, she went to the king. It started small. A pot of tea delivered to the council chamber during a long meeting. A tray of bread and cheese left outside his study when she knew he had missed dinner. Small gestures that any servant might offer, unremarkable and easy to dismiss. But Taryn noticed. He always noticed. The first time she brought him tea, he looked up from a stack of parchment, his pale blue eyes sharp with surprise. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, an invitation, not a command. Mira sat. She poured the tea in silence, the scent of chamomile and lavender filling the small room. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, but her wolf surged upward, desperate and hungry. Theron pulled his hand back as if burned. Over the days that followed, she learned to read him. The tilt of his head when he was considering something carefully, the way his hand moved in short, decisive strokes when he was frustrated, the tension in his jaw when he was in pain but refusing to show it. She learned that he took his tea without honey, that he worked late into the night, and that he carried the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders with a discipline that bordered on self-destruction. And she learned that every time she was near him, his wolf fought his control. On the 14th night, Mira found him in the library. The room was vast and shadowed, lit only by a single candle on the long oak table. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes and rolled maps. The air smelled of parchment and old ink. Theron sat at the table, surrounded by maps of the kingdom's borders. His hand was pressed to his temple, his jaw tight, his breathing shallow. He was in pain. Mira hesitated in the doorway. She should leave. She should let him suffer in private, the way he clearly preferred. But her wolf would not let her. She crossed the room silently, her footsteps muffled by the thick rug. When she reached his side, she placed a hand on his shoulder. The effect was immediate. Electric. A jolt of heat that shot through her arm and into her chest, igniting something deep and primal and utterly beyond her control. Theron went rigid beneath her touch. His wolf surged, she could feel it. A wild, desperate thing clawing at the surface, demanding to be let out. Hers answered with a howl that reverberated through her bones. Mate, her wolf whispered. Ours. Touch. Stay. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mira's hand remained on his shoulder. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. She could feel the heat of his skin through the linen, the tension coiled in his muscles, the way his breathing had gone uneven. Theron turned his head slowly. His gaze met hers, and the intensity in his pale blue eyes stole the breath from her lungs. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking for years, like she was dangerous, like she was salvation. Then he pulled away. The loss of contact was devastating. Mira stumbled back, her hand falling to her side, her chest aching. Theron stood, his movements sharp and controlled. He reached for a piece of parchment and wrote in quick, angry strokes. Then he held it out to her, his expression tortured. You should not be near me. Mira stared at the words. Her throat tightened. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Theron did not answer. He turned away, his shoulders tense, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Mira left. She walked through the dark corridors back to her chambers, her wolf howling inside her chest, furious and heartbroken and confused. She did not understand. The mate bond was real. She felt it every time they were in the same room, every time their eyes met, every time he looked at her like she was something precious and forbidden all at once. So why did he keep pushing her away? Her chambers were cold and empty. The fire had burned low, and the room smelt faintly of lavender from the soap the servants had left by the basin. Mira crossed to the window and looked out over the palace gardens. The moon was bright, casting silver light over the hedges and stone paths below. And there, near the fountain at the center of the garden, she saw him. Caspian. He was not alone. A figure in a dark hooded cloak stood beside him, their face obscured by shadow. Mira could not hear their conversation, but she watched as Caspian reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial. The liquid inside glowed faintly, a sickly green that made her wolf bristle. Dark magic. Caspian handed the vial to the hooded figure. They exchanged a few words, and then the figure disappeared into the shadows, moving too quickly, too fluidly to be entirely human. Mira's fingers tightened on the windowsill. Whatever Caspian was planning, it was accelerating. She turned away from the window and crossed to the writing desk in the corner of her room. She needed to document what she had seen, needed to start building a case against him that she could present when the time came. But when she reached the desk, she froze. A piece of parchment lay on the surface. It had not been there when she left. Mira's pulse quickened. She picked it up with trembling hands. The message was written in elegant script, each letter perfectly formed. "Stop watching me, little queen. You will not like what you find." There was no signature, no seal. But Mira did not need one. She knew exactly who had written it. Caspian had been in her chambers, had walked through her door, past whatever guards were supposed to be protecting the king's wife, and left this message on her desk like a threat wrapped in silk. He knew she was watching him. And he was not afraid. 3 days after Caspian's warning, Mira woke before dawn and went to the royal gardens. The palace was already humming with preparation for the winter solstice feast. Servants rushed through corridors carrying linens and silverware. The scent of roasting meat drifted from the kitchens. Musicians practiced in the great hall, their instruments echoing off stone walls. Mira ignored all of it. She needed herbs. Medicinal plants that grew best in the early morning frost, when their oils were most potent. The garden was silent and cold. Her breath misted in the air as she knelt among the winter rosemary and thyme, her fingers working quickly to gather stems and leaves. The scent of sage and lavender clung to her hands. She had been doing this for years, gathering herbs in secret, preparing remedies no one would ever know came from her. It was the one piece of her Sylvain training she could not abandon, the one thread connecting her to the girl she had been before everything was taken. "What are you doing?" Mira's head snapped up. Theron stood at the edge of the garden path, his black hair damp from bathing, his pale blue eyes sharp with curiosity. He wore simple training clothes, a linen shirt and dark pants, and his hands were tucked into his pockets against the cold. He had asked the question aloud, his voice rough and quiet, but his gaze was fixed on her lips, waiting for her answer. Mira rose slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. She held up the bundle of herbs, then spoke carefully, enunciating each word so he could read her mouth. "Making tea. For headaches." Saren's brow furrowed. He stepped closer, his gaze dropping to the plants in her hands. He gestured to them, then to himself, a question in the movement. She understood. He wanted to know if the tea was for him. Mira hesitated. Then she nodded. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. He gestured toward the palace, an invitation. That evening, Mira stood outside the king's chambers with a tray bearing a small pot of tea and 2 cups. Her pulse hammered in her throat. This was not a servant's errand. This was something else entirely. She knocked. The door opened. Theron stood in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair falling across his forehead. He stepped aside to let her enter. The room was warmer than it had been the first night. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the writing desk had been cleared of some of its clutter. Maps still covered one wall, but there were fewer parchments scattered across the floor. Mira set the tray on the small table near the window and poured the tea. The scent of chamomile and willow bark filled the room, soft and earthy. She handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed. The contact sent heat racing up her arm, and her wolf surged forward, desperate and hungry. Theron took the cup and drank. He closed his eyes, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since she had entered the room. When he opened his eyes again, the tightness around his mouth had eased. The constant tension in his jaw had softened. He set the cup down and reached for parchment and quill. How did you know? Mira's chest tightened. She could not tell him the truth, that she had been trained to recognize the signs of curse-induced pain, that her Sylvain gift allowed her to sense the dark magic festering in his body, that every instinct she had was screaming at her to heal him completely. So she lied. My mother taught me, she said slowly, before she died. Theron watched her for a long moment. Then he wrote again, his strokes quick and deliberate. You are not what you seem. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her wolf went still. Her hands trembled. He knew, or he suspected, and if he kept pushing, if he kept asking questions, she would not be able to hold the lie together. Mira forced herself to meet his gaze. She spoke carefully, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. No one in a palace is ever what they seem. It was not a denial. It was a deflection, a truth wrapped around a lie. Theron's jaw tightened. He studied her, his pale blue eyes searching her face as if he could read the secrets written in her skin. But he did not press. He simply nodded once, sharp and final, and turned back to his desk. Mira left before her resolve could crumble. The corridor outside was dim and empty, lit only by torches spaced along the stone walls. She walked quickly, her mind racing. She needed to be more careful, needed to hide her abilities better, needed to... My queen. She froze. Caspian stood at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His golden hair caught the firelight, and his smile was cold and knowing. He pushed off the wall and walked toward her, his footsteps echoing off stone. How kind of you to tend to our king so personally, he said, his voice smooth as silk. I hope he's feeling better. Mira said nothing. She could not trust her voice. Caspian stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the rings on his fingers. The stolen signet ring glinted in the torchlight. Be careful, my queen, he said softly. The solstice feast can be unpredictable. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Mira stood frozen in the corridor, her wolf snarling low in her chest. 4 days. She had 4 days to figure out what Caspian was planning. That night, long after the palace had fallen silent, Mira slipped through the shadows toward Caspian's private office. She had watched him long enough to know his patterns. He left the office locked but unguarded, confident that no one would dare break in. The lock was simple, an old mechanism that yielded easily to the thin blade she had stolen from the kitchens. The door swung open with a soft creak. The office was small and meticulously organized. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ledgers and bound documents. A desk sat in the center of the room, its surface clear except for an inkwell and a single candle. Mira moved quickly. She searched the desk first, her fingers trembling as she rifled through drawers. Parchment, quills, wax seals, nothing. Then she found the locked drawer at the bottom. She used the blade again, her hand steadier now, and the lock clicked open. Inside, she found 2 things. The first was a small glass vial filled with dark green liquid. A label was affixed to the side, written in Caspian's elegant script, Solstice. The second was a silver ring. Mira's breath caught. She lifted the ring with shaking hands, holding it up to the candlelight. It was her father's signet ring. The crest of House Sylvain, a curling vine wrapped around a crescent moon, was etched into the silver, worn smooth by years of wear. She had watched Caspian wear this ring for 5 years, had seen it on his hand every day, a constant reminder of what he had taken from her. And now it was in her palm, heavy and cold and real. Proof. Mira slipped the ring into her pocket. She left the vial where it was. If she took it, Caspian would know someone had been here. But the ring was small enough, easily overlooked if he did not check the drawer carefully. She closed the drawer, locked it again, and slipped out of the office. Back in her chambers, Mira sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the ring in her palm. This was the proof she had been searching for, the evidence that could tie Caspian to her family's massacre. But using it would mean revealing who she truly was, and she was not ready for that. Not yet. The winter solstice feast blazed with light and sound. Torches lined the grand hall in rows, their flames casting dancing shadows across tapestries and stone. Musicians played from the gallery above, their instruments weaving through the hum of 300 voices. The air smelled of roasted boar, spiced wine, and the pine garlands draped across every pillar. Mira sat at the king's table on the raised dais, her hands folded in her lap, her spine rigid with tension. She had never sat at this table before, had never been this visible, this exposed. Every noble in the hall could see her. The fat kitchen girl elevated to queen, seated beside the deaf king like a cruel joke made flesh. But she was not watching the nobles. She was watching Caspian. He stood near the throne, resplendent in dark velvet embroidered with silver thread. His golden hair gleamed in the torchlight, and his smile was warm as he moved through the crowd, greeting lords and ladies with effortless charm. And on his right hand, the stolen ring glinted. Mira's wolf growled low in her chest. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to keep her expression neutral. Beside her, Theron sat in silence. He wore formal regalia, a black tunic with the royal crest embroidered in silver, his hair neatly combed, his jaw tight. He did not eat, did not drink. He simply watched the hall with the same sharp, controlled focus he brought to everything. But Mira could feel the tension radiating from him. The way his hand rested on the armrest, his fingers curled slightly, as if he were fighting the urge to reach for her. The feast began with speeches. Lord Brennan stood and toasted the king's health. Lady Isolde praised the bounty of the harvest. Caspian spoke last, his voice smooth and persuasive, thanking the court for their loyalty and promising a prosperous year ahead. The crowd applauded. Servants moved through the hall, filling goblets with wine. Mira watched every servant who approached the king's table, watched their hands, their movements, the way they poured the wine. One of them, a young man in palace livery, filled Theron's goblet. He set the bottle down and moved on without meeting anyone's eyes. Mira's pulse quickened. Something about the gesture felt wrong. Too quick, too careful. Theron reached for his goblet. Mira's hand shot out, her fingers closing around his wrist. He froze. His gaze snapped to hers, confusion flickering across his face. She shook her head slowly, her eyes locked on his. "Do not drink it." But Theron pulled his hand free gently, his expression apologetic. He thought she was being overly cautious. Thought she was worried about nothing. He lifted the goblet to his lips and drank. Mira's wolf screamed. For a moment, nothing happened. Theron set the goblet down, his expression unchanged. Then his hand went to his temple. His jaw tightened. His breathing quickened. Mira's chest constricted. No. Theron's eyes widened. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Then he collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the floor silenced the entire hall. Mira was on her feet before she realized she had moved. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for his face. Blood seeped from his ears, dark and wet, staining the stone floor beneath his head. His body convulsed, his back arching, his hands curled into fists. The curse was finishing what it had started 3 years ago. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted, servants screamed. Guards rushed forward, unsure what to do. Healer Marin appeared at Mira's side, her face pale and stricken. She placed her hands on Theron's chest, murmuring words Mira could not hear over the roar of blood in her ears. But Mira could feel it. The dark magic coiling through Theron's body, feeding on his wolf's energy, choking the life from him. Marin pulled her hands back, shaking her head. "I cannot reach it," she whispered. "The curse is too deep." Caspian's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Clear the room. Give the healers space." Mira looked up. Caspian stood at the edge of the dais, his face a perfect mask of concern. But his hand rested on the throne's armrest, casual and confident. And the stolen ring glinted in the torchlight. Mira's wolf snarled. She understood. This was Caspian's coup. Let the king die in front of everyone. Position himself as the grieving, loyal advisor. Seize control of a kingdom too fractured to resist. No one would ever know. Theron's body went still. His breathing stopped. Mira's world narrowed to a single, impossible choice. She could stay hidden. Let him die. Take her revenge on Caspian in secret, the way she had always planned. Or she could risk everything. Her wolf howled. Mate, save him. Ours. Mira placed her hands over Theron's bleeding ears. The hall went silent. She closed her eyes and called on the full force of her Sylvain gift, the magic she had kept buried for 17 years, the power that would mark her for death the moment anyone saw it. Her hands began to glow. Silver light poured from her palms, bright and unmistakable, flooding the space between her fingers and Theron's skin. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. Mira ignored them. She reached into the place where the curse had nested, her magic threading through blood and bone and wolf essence, searching for the source. There, she felt it. Cold, writhing, alive. A barbed thorn of pure malice, lodged deep in his ear canal, feeding on his wolf's energy like a parasite. Mira's fingers closed around it, not physically, but with her magic, her will, her desperate refusal to let him go. The curse fought back. It twisted in her grip, sending bolts of pain up her arms and into her chest. She gritted her teeth and pulled. The thorn resisted. It had roots, tendrils that had burrowed deep into Theron's flesh. Mira pulled harder. The world narrowed to the sensation of the curse in her hands, cold and slick and wrong. Her magic burned through her veins, hotter than fire, brighter than the sun. And then, with a final wrenching pull, the curse tore free. It materialized in her hand, a black, writhing thing the size of a rose thorn, pulsing with dark magic and dripping with shadow. The moment it left Theron's body, it disintegrated into ash. The hall was utterly silent. Theron's eyes snapped open. He drew in a shuddering breath, his chest heaving. And for the first time in 3 years, he heard. He heard the crackle of the torches, the gasps of the nobles, the rustle of fabric as people stepped back in shock. He heard Mira's ragged breathing, the hitch in her throat as she fought back tears. He heard his wolf, roaring to life inside his chest. Mate. Ours. Protect. Theron's gaze locked on Mira's face. Her gray-green eyes were wide and terrified, her hands still glowing faintly with silver light. The court stared. Every eye in the hall was fixed on her, on the girl who had just performed magic the kingdom had not seen in 17 years. Sylvain magic, forbidden magic. Caspian moved first. He stepped forward, his voice sharp and accusing. Seize her. She is a dark witch. She has cursed the king. The guards hesitated. Theron tried to sit up, his hand reaching for Mira, but his body was weak, his wolf still recovering. Caspian's voice rose, filling the hall. She used forbidden magic, Sylvain witchcraft. She has been manipulating the king since the wedding. Arrest her, now. 2 guards grabbed Mira's arms, hauling her to her feet. She did not resist. She could not. Her secret was gone. Her cover was shattered. And the man she had tried so hard not to love was staring at her with a mixture of awe and devastation. Theron tried to speak, his voice rough and broken. No. But Caspian spoke over him, his tone final and damning. Take her to the dungeons. The trial will be held at dawn, and the execution will follow immediately. Mira was dragged from the hall, her hands still trembling, her wolf howling in anguish. Behind her, Theron's voice rang out raw, desperate, the first words he had spoken in 3 years. But it was not strong enough to stop what had already been set in motion. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and old blood. Mira sat on the floor of her cell, her back against the cold wall, her wrists bound in iron cuffs that burned against her skin. The metal suppressed her magic, leaving her hollow and aching. Her father's ring lay in her palm. She had managed to keep it hidden when the guards searched her, clutching it so tightly the edges cut into her skin. It was the only proof she had, the only evidence that could tie Caspian to the massacre. But proof meant nothing if no one believed her. The torches in the corridor flickered, casting shadows across the iron bars. Mira could hear voices from above, distant shouting, footsteps pounding through the palace. The council was in session. Her fate was being decided by people who had never seen her as anything more than a servant. A soft sound broke the silence. Footsteps, light and careful. Mira looked up. A figure appeared at the bars, small, red-haired, familiar. Lysa. The kitchen maid pressed herself against the cell door, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She glanced over her shoulder, then whispered urgently, "They are saying you cursed him, that you used dark magic." Mira's throat tightened. She shook her head. "I healed him. I know." Lysa's voice cracked. "I saw the light. I saw what you did. But Lord Caspian is telling them you are the reason the king was sick in the first place. Half the council believes him." Mira closed her eyes. Of course they did. Caspian had spent years building trust, positioning himself as the kingdom's loyal protector. She was nobody. A fat kitchen girl who had appeared out of nowhere. "What about the king?" Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lysa's expression shifted, hope and heartbreak tangled together. "He is demanding your release." But his voice, she hesitated. "He has not spoken in 3 years. The council does not trust it. They think you enchanted him somehow, and his wolf is still weak. He cannot command them the way he used to." Mira's chest ached. Theron was fighting for her, but he was losing. "Lord Caspian is calling for a trial at dawn," Lysa continued, "and execution to follow immediately after." Dawn. Mira had hours, maybe less. "Go," she whispered. "Before someone sees you." Lysa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I wish I could do more." "You have done enough." Lysa disappeared into the shadows. Her footsteps faded, leaving Mira alone again. Mira stared at the ring in her palm. She had one move left, one desperate gamble. She could reveal her true identity at the trial. Tell the court she was Mira Sylvain, last daughter of the massacred bloodline. Show them the ring. Accuse Caspian of ordering her family's execution. But if they did not believe her, she would die as both a witch and a traitor. Hours passed. The torches burned low. Mira's wolf whined softly, aching for the mate bond that felt impossibly distant now. Then she heard new footsteps. Slow, deliberate, confident. Caspian appeared at the bars. He looked immaculate, as always. His golden hair gleamed in the torchlight, and his pale green eyes were cold and amused. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying her like she was an insect pinned to a board. "You should have stayed invisible," he said softly. Mira did not answer. She met his gaze, her jaw tight. Caspian smiled. "I have to admire your audacity. Hiding in plain sight for 5 years. I never suspected. The fat kitchen girl, a Sylvain heir." He shook his head, almost fond. "Your mother would be proud." Mira's wolf snarled, her fingers curled into fists. "You killed them for gold," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You sold out an entire bloodline for a rival kingdom's coin." "I did." Caspian's smile did not waver. "And I would do it again. Your family's magic was a threat. Healers who could detect curses, break enchantments, see through lies." He leaned closer to the bars. "I could not allow that. Not when I had a king to control. Theron knows the truth now." "Does he?" Caspian laughed softly. "He knows you healed him. He knows you wield Sylvain magic. But does he know who ordered your family's execution? Does he have proof?" He held up his hand, showing the rings on his fingers. The stolen signet ring glinted. "This? A trinket. Easily explained. I could say I bought it from a merchant. The council will believe me." Mira's chest constricted. He was right. Without more evidence, it was her word against his. "I am going to kill you," Caspian continued, his tone conversational. "At dawn in front of the court. And then I am going to let the king grieve. Let him rage. Let him exhaust himself trying to prove your innocence." He smiled. "And when he is weak enough, when his wolf is fractured again, I will finish what I started. The curse will return. And this time, there will be no one left to save him." He turned to leave, then paused. "You chose the wrong man to love, little queen." You should have stayed hidden. Caspian walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Mira sat in the darkness, her wolf howling in anguish, her hands shaking around the ring that no longer felt like enough. She had failed. She had exposed herself, saved Theron's life, and doomed them both. Above, in the throne room, Theron sat at his desk surrounded by parchment and law books. His hands were ink-stained, his eyes red from exhaustion. He had been writing for hours, letters to the council, appeals to ancient laws, desperate arguments for why Mira should be freed. None of it was working. His wolf raged inside him, a constant roar of fury and grief. Mate, mate, save her, ours. But he could not. His voice was too new, too weak. The council did not trust it. They saw him as compromised, enchanted, unable to make rational decisions. For the first time in 3 years, Theron could hear everything, and the thing he heard most clearly was his own failure. He had let them take her. Let them drag her to the dungeons while he was still too weak to stand. Let Caspian twist the narrative, turn the court against her, position himself as the kingdom's protector. Theron's hands curled into fists. He wanted to shift, to let his wolf tear through the palace until Mira was safe in his arms. But that would only prove the council right that he was unstable, dangerous, unfit to rule. He reached for another piece of parchment. His hand shook. Then he stopped. There was one option he had not tried, one person who might be able to sway the council. He stood, his legs still unsteady, and walked to the door. Back in the dungeon, Mira heard footsteps again. She did not look up. She assumed it was a guard, coming to move her to a holding cell closer to the execution platform. But the footsteps stopped at her cell. A key turned in the lock. Mira's head snapped up. A guard stood in the doorway, an older man with gray hair and a scar across his knuckles. Captain Rowan, the head of the Royal Guard. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped inside and held out a folded piece of parchment. "From the king," he said quietly. Mira took it with trembling hands. She unfolded the parchment and read the single line written in Theron's sharp, decisive script. "Trust me. Do not confess. I am coming." Her wolf stirred. The bond, faint but present, pulsed in her chest. He had not abandoned her. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Northern Crescent Palace. Mira was dragged from her cell in chains, her wrists still bound in iron. Her body exhausted from a night without sleep. The guards marched her through the corridors in silence, their faces carefully blank. The throne room was packed. Every noble in the kingdom had gathered, lords and ladies in their finest silks, council members in their formal robes, witnesses lined along the walls. The air smelled of cold stone and burning torches, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Theron sat on the throne. Mira's breath caught. She had not seen him since the feast, since she had saved his life and been dragged away for it. He looked exhausted. His black hair was disheveled, his jaw tight, his pale blue eyes shadowed with something that looked like grief. But he sat with perfect discipline, his hands resting on the throne's armrests, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the room. The mate bond flared to life in Mira's chest, sharp and aching. He had not abandoned her. He was here. The guards forced her to her knees in the center of the room. The chains clinked against the stone floor. Caspian stepped forward, resplendent in dark velvet, his golden hair gleaming in the torchlight. He addressed the court with the calm authority of a man who believed he had already won. "My lords and ladies, we are gathered to judge a woman accused of dark witchcraft, manipulation of the crown, and treason against this kingdom." His voice was smooth, persuasive. "The evidence is clear. She used forbidden Sylvain magic, magic that has been outlawed for 17 years to curse our king and control his mind." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. Caspian called his witnesses. A servant testified that she had seen Mira gathering herbs in the gardens at strange hours. A noble claimed he had heard her speaking to the king in strange tongues, her lips moving in incantations. She had been enunciating clearly so Theron could read her lips. But the court did not know that. They saw what Caspian wanted them to see. The case was damning. Mira could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. Finally, Caspian turned to her, his pale green eyes cold and triumphant. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Mira rose to her feet. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had one move left, one desperate gamble. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "My name is Mira Sylvain. I am the last living daughter of House Sylvain, a bloodline of healers murdered 17 years ago by order of Lord Caspian Valon." The court erupted. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Nobles surged to their feet. Caspian's expression did not change, but Mira saw his hand tighten on the hilt of his sword. She held up her father's signet ring, the one she had stolen from Caspian's office. "This ring belonged to my father. Lord Caspian took it as a trophy after he ordered my family's execution. He killed them because our healing magic could have detected the curse he planted in the king 3 years ago, the curse I broke when I saved King Theron's life." The room went silent. Mira's voice shook, but she did not stop. "Sylvain magic is not dark, it is healing magic, the magic that saved your king when no one else could. Lord Caspian has lied to you for 17 years. He cursed the king, he murdered my family, and now he wants to kill me so I cannot expose the truth." Caspian stepped forward, his voice sharp. "She is lying. A desperate criminal inventing stories to save herself. That ring could have come from anywhere. There is no proof." The council murmured. Half the nobles looked uncertain. The other half looked terrified. Then Theron rose. The room fell silent. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, and for the first time in 3 years he spoke. His voice was rough from disuse, raw and commanding, but unmistakably the voice of an alpha. "She is my mate." The words echoed through the throne room like thunder. Every wolf in the room felt the weight of the alpha command that laced his voice, the power that compelled obedience, that demanded they listen. "She saved my life," Theron continued, his gaze sweeping across the court. "She broke a curse that your healers could not touch. She risked everything to heal me when she could have stayed hidden and safe." He stepped down from the dais, his eyes locked on Mira. "I will investigate Lord Caspian's crimes personally, and I will not allow this court to execute the woman who gave me back my voice." The council froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Caspian's face drained of color. He saw it, the shift in power, the way the court was beginning to turn, the way Theron's wolf blazed to life in his eyes. He was losing. Caspian moved fast. His hand went to his belt, and a blade appeared thin, sharp, poisoned. He lunged for Mira. Theron was faster. The king shifted mid-leap, his body exploding into the massive silver wolf that had been caged for 3 years. He hit Caspian with the force of a landslide, slamming him to the ground. The blade skittered across the stone floor. Caspian screamed. Theron's wolf pinned him, jaws around his throat, a growl rumbling through the hall that made every noble step back in terror. Guards rushed forward. Captain Rowan barked orders. Caspian was seized, dragged to his feet, his hands bound. Theron shifted back to human form, his chest heaving, his eyes still blazing with silver light. He crossed to Mira in 3 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she had not realized were falling. "You are safe," he said, his voice rough and aching. "I will never let anyone hurt you again." And then he kissed her. The bond snapped into place like a lightning strike, bright, overwhelming, undeniable. Mira felt it surge through her chest, her wolf howling in triumph as the mate bond completed, locking them together in a way that could never be broken. The court watched in stunned silence as their king claimed his mate in front of the entire kingdom. The throne room was in chaos. Nobles whispered in tight clusters. Guards stood at attention with uncertain expressions, and servants peered through doorways, trying to understand what had just happened. Mira stood beside Theron, the mate bond humming between them, still new and overwhelming. Her lips still burned from his kiss, her wolf sang with triumph. But the work was not done. Theron's voice cut through the noise, clear and commanding. "Captain Rowan, take Lord Caspian to the holding cells. Post 6 guards. No one enters without my permission." Rowan saluted. Caspian was dragged from the room, his face pale and twisted with fury. Theron turned to the council. "I am ordering a full investigation. Search Caspian's private chambers, his office, his records. Bring everything to me." The council hesitated. Lord Brennan stepped forward, his expression cautious. "Your Majesty, with respect, perhaps we should proceed carefully. Lord Caspian has served this kingdom for— He tried to kill me," Theron said flatly. "Twice. And he murdered an entire noble family to cover his crimes. Search his chambers. Now." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. The council dispersed. Hours later, the throne room had transformed into a war room. Tables were covered with evidence ledgers, letters, vials of dark liquid, and small enchanted tokens that pulsed with faint magic. Captain Rowan stood before the king, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "We found everything, Your Majesty. Payment records for the Sylvain massacre. Correspondence with the Eastern Alliance offering to sell kingdom secrets. Vials of curse poison. And these." He held up a small wooden box filled with carved tokens, each one bearing a noble house's crest. Theron's jaw tightened. "What are they?" Mira stepped forward. She could feel the dark magic radiating from the tokens, subtle and insidious. She picked one up carefully, her healing senses reaching out. "Enchantments," she said quietly, "designed to influence the mind, make the bearer more suggestible, more loyal to whoever holds the control token." The council members went pale. Theron's voice was deadly calm. "Which nobles?" Rowan read from a list. 12 names. 12 lords who had supported Caspian's lies, who had called for Mira's execution, who had voted against the king at every turn. They had been puppets, controlled, manipulated. Mira looked at Theron. "I can break them." He met her gaze, his pale blue eyes searching hers. "Are you certain?" She nodded. Her magic was meant for healing, but enchantments were wounds of a different kind. Magical scars that needed to be lifted, cleaned, sealed. The afflicted nobles were brought forward one by one. Mira placed her hands on their temples, called on her Sylvain gift, and reached into the places where Caspian's magic had burrowed. Each enchantment came free like a splinter, sharp, painful, but ultimately clean. The nobles gasped as the influence lifted, their eyes clearing, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. Lord Brennan was the last. When Mira broke his enchantment, he staggered backward, his face ashen. "I voted to execute you," he whispered. "I believed him. I thought—" "You were not in control," Mira said gently. "None of you were." The council convened. The vote was unanimous. Lord Caspian Valon was guilty of treason, murder, conspiracy, and dark magic manipulation. Execution was set for dawn. But before the sentence could be carried out, Mira stepped forward. "I want to ask him something first." Theron nodded. Caspian was brought back to the throne room in chains, flanked by guards. He looked smaller now, diminished. The charm and confidence had drained away, leaving only bitterness. Mira stood before him, her voice steady. "Tell the court why you did it." Caspian laughed, the sound hollow and broken. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He met her gaze, his pale green eyes empty. "I was hired. 20 years ago, the Eastern Alliance wanted to destabilize the Northern Crescent from within. They paid well. I was meant to weaken the kingdom slowly, sow discord, position myself for a coup." The court listened in silence. "The Sylvain family," Caspian continued, his voice flat, "was targeted because your healing magic could have detected my curses, broken them, exposed me, so I had them eliminated. All of them." He looked at Mira with something that might have been regret. "Except you, the overlooked child. I thought you died with the rest." Mira's hands curled into fists. Her wolf snarled. But she did not move. "You destroyed my family for gold," she said quietly. "You cursed the king. You tried to kill us both. And for what? A throne you would have sold to the highest bidder? Caspian said nothing. Theron stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You will die at dawn. But first, I offer my mate a choice. He turned to Mira, his expression solemn. Your family was taken from you by this man's hand. By law and by right, you may deliver the final strike. If you wish it, I will give you that justice. The room went silent. Mira looked at Caspian. She thought of her mother, her father, her siblings. She thought of 17 years spent hiding, burning with the need for revenge. Her wolf wanted blood, wanted to tear him apart. But Mira had learned something in the weeks since the Harvest Moon ceremony, something about who she wanted to be. She turned to Theron, her voice clear. No, my family's legacy is healing, not vengeance. I will not let his evil turn me into something I am not. Theron's eyes softened. He took her hand, squeezed it gently. Then justice will be carried out by the crown. Caspian was taken away, the court dispersed. The palace began to settle into an uneasy peace. That night, Mira and Theron stood alone in the royal gardens. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light across the flowers and stone paths. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and cold earth. Theron had not let go of her hand since the trial ended. He turned to her now, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen. The bond is incomplete, he said softly. We felt it snap into place, but to seal it fully, we must claim each other. The bite. Mira's wolf surged forward, eager and wild. I know. Theron stepped closer. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I need you to understand what this means. Once the bond is complete, we are tied together for life. You will feel everything I feel. I will feel everything you feel. There is no breaking it. I know, she whispered. I am asking you to choose me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not because of duty or politics or because I am king. The first I'm asking you to choose me because you want to. Because your wolf recognizes mine. Because you see me all of me and you still want to stay. Mira's chest ached. I choose you, she said. I have been choosing you since the moment you offered me an escape and I decided to stay. I choose you, Theron. Now and always. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and the mate bond flared between them like wildfire. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Theron tilted his head, exposing the curve of his neck. Claim me. Mira leaned in, her wolf guiding her instincts. She pressed her lips to the juncture of his neck and shoulder, felt his pulse beneath her mouth, and bit down. The bond exploded. Magic surged through her veins, bright and overwhelming, and she felt Theron's wolf roar in triumph as the claim sealed. Then it was her turn. She tilted her head, offering her neck, and Theron's teeth sank into her skin with the same reverent precision. The world went white. The bond completed, locking them together in a way that transcended words or logic or anything Mira had ever known. When she opened her eyes, she could feel him, his heartbeat, his wolf, his soul, and he could feel hers. They stood in the garden, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was alone. 2 weeks later, the grand hall gleamed with light and flowers. Torches lined every wall, their flames reflected in polished stone. White winter roses and silver ribbons draped from the rafters. The scent of pine and honey filled the air. Mira stood in the preparation chamber, her hands shaking as servants fastened the last buttons of her gown. The dress was not what she had expected. It was deep green silk, the color of forest shadows, with silver embroidery that traced patterns of vines and crescent moons across the bodice. The sleeves were long and elegant. The skirt fell in soft waves that moved with her body rather than fighting against it. It had been made for her, not for the body she wished she had, but for the body she carried with strength and survival. Lysa stood beside her, tears streaming down her freckled face. You look like a queen, she whispered. Mira met her own gaze in the mirror. For the first time in 17 years, she did not see someone who needed to hide. She saw herself. The doors to the grand hall opened. Music swelled. Every noble in the kingdom stood in perfect rows, their faces turned toward her. But this time, there was no laughter, no mockery, only silence and anticipation. Theron waited at the far end of the hall, standing beside the throne. He wore formal regalia, black and silver, the colors of the Northern Crescent, but his eyes were only on her. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and certain. Mira walked forward. Each step felt like shedding another layer of invisibility, another year of hiding. By the time she reached the dais, she was no longer the girl who had scrubbed pots in the kitchen. She was Mira Sylvain, the last daughter of a murdered bloodline, the woman who had chosen to be seen. Theron took her hand. His touch was steady and grounding. The ceremony began. Healer Marin stepped forward, carrying a crown on a velvet cushion. It was silver, delicate and strong at once, shaped like intertwined crescent moons. But before the crown could be placed, Theron turned to address the court. His voice carried across the hall, clear and commanding. This kingdom has lived in fear for too long. Fear of magic we did not understand. Fear of power that could heal rather than harm. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled nobles. Sylvain magic is not dark, it is a gift. And today, we honor that gift by reopening the Healers' Academy. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nobles whispered to one another, uncertain. Theron continued, his voice growing stronger. Any who possess the healing gift will be welcomed, trained, honored. The kingdom lost too much knowledge when House Sylvain was destroyed. We will not make that mistake again. He turned to Mira, his pale blue eyes soft with something that looked like pride. My queen carries the last of that knowledge, and she will help rebuild what was taken from us. The court was silent. Then, slowly, Lord Brennan stepped forward and bowed. Others followed. One by one, the nobles who had once called for her execution lowered their heads in respect. Healer Marin placed the crown on Mira's head. The silver was cool against her skin, lighter than she had expected. The court bowed as one. Mira's wolf sang with triumph. But more than that, with relief. The hiding was over. The fight was done. After the formalities ended, Mira was given a chance to speak. She stood before the crowd, her heart steady, her voice clear. I spent 17 years invisible, she said. I learned to make myself small, to hide what I was, to survive by being overlooked. She paused, meeting the eyes of the nobles who had once mocked her. But true strength is not in hiding. It is in choosing the moment you let yourself be known. She spoke of her family, of the night they were taken from her, of the years she spent planning revenge, only to discover that healing was more powerful than vengeance. Worthiness is not determined by your bloodline or your body or your power, she said quietly. It is determined by your choices, by what you do when the world tells you to stay small, by whether you choose love over fear. Her gaze found Theron. He stood beside the throne, watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. I chose love, she said, and it saved me. The crowd erupted in cheers. The sound was overwhelming, joyful and genuine and utterly different from the laughter that had greeted her name at the Harvest Moon ceremony. Theron descended from the dais and took her hand. Together, they walked through the grand hall as the court parted to let them pass, king and queen, alpha and healer. Mates bound by choice and magic and the kind of love that refused to be broken. They walked through the palace corridors, past servants who stopped to bow, past guards who saluted with genuine respect. The bond between them was a constant warmth, a thread of connection that would never fade. When they reached their chambers, Theron closed the door and pulled Mira into his arms. You were extraordinary, he murmured against her hair. Mira leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and winter air that clung to his skin. I was terrified. You did not show it. She pulled back to look at him. His black hair was slightly disheveled from the formal crown he had worn earlier. His pale blue eyes were warm and unguarded. What do you want now? He asked softly. You are free, truly free to choose your own path. The Healer's Academy, the Council, whatever you wish. What do you want, Mira? She smiled, her wolf pressed against her thoughts, content and certain. I already have everything I want. Theron's expression shifted. Something vulnerable and aching flickered across his face. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, and for the first time in either of their lives, they were simply two people who had found each other against impossible odds and refused to let go. 1 year later, spring came to the Northern Crescent Kingdom with warmth and new life. Mira walked through the royal gardens, her hand resting on the soft curve of her belly, 6 months along. The baby moved beneath her palm, a flutter of motion that still felt like magic. The gardens had transformed. Beds of lavender and rosemary bloomed where winter roses had once stood. Healing herbs grew in careful rows near the kitchen entrance. Plants that had once been gathered in secret, now tended openly by students from the Healer's Academy. The academy itself stood in the distance, visible beyond the palace walls. A sprawling stone building with wide windows and smoke rising from the chimneys. Dozens of students trained there now, learning the healing arts that had nearly died with her family. Mira could hear their voices sometimes, drifting across the gardens on warm afternoons. Young and eager and unafraid. Theron found her sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree. He moved quietly, but she felt him through the bond before she saw him warmth and steadiness and home. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. His hand covered hers on her belly. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Good. Tired. Happy." He smiled. It was still a rare thing, that smile, but it came more easily now. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of birdsong and distant laughter from the palace kitchens. The mate bond hummed between them, as constant as breathing. "I was thinking about a year ago," Mira said quietly, "about the girl I was, invisible, angry, so certain I had to destroy Caspian alone." Theron's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Do you regret it? The path that brought you here?" She considered the question. The years of hiding. The loneliness. The weight of vengeance that had consumed her for so long. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. But I am grateful I no longer have to carry it alone." Theron pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and winter that still clung to his skin even in spring. "When I am in wolf form," he said, his voice low and wondering, "I can hear the baby's heartbeat, strong and steady. It sounds like hope." Mira's throat tightened. She pressed her hand over his, their fingers intertwining. "What kind of kingdom do you want to build?" she asked. "For them? One where strength is measured by kindness, where no one has to hide who they are, where healing is honored above conquest." He paused. "One where our child never has to choose between love and survival." Mira turned to look at him. His pale blue eyes were soft and unguarded, reflecting the golden light of late afternoon. "We will build it together," she said. "Together," he agreed. They sat until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The Healer's Academy glowed in the distance, its windows bright with lamplight. The palace hummed with life servants preparing dinner, guards changing shifts, courtiers gathered in the halls. The kingdom was healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Mira thought about the future, about the child who would grow up knowing both parents, who would learn healing magic without fear, who would inherit a kingdom built on truth rather than lies. She thought about legacy, about the choice her mother had made to hide her, and the choice she had made to step into the light. Theron said something, a quiet observation about the gardens, about how the rosemary was thriving this year, and Mira laughed. The sound was unguarded and joyful, carried on the spring breeze, and Theron realized, with a warmth that flooded through the mate bond and settled in his chest, that it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Follow for more tales of fated love, hidden magic, and the courage it takes to be truly seen. Until next time, remember, True power is not in being seen, it is in choosing the moment you let yourself be known.